Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's a Ukraine War News Update. First part though, a very belated first part for the 8th of June 2024. Do apologise, I have not been with you all morning. I was at my son's football tournament over in the delightful Haven at Waterlooville Stadium. 13-year-old twin, one of my twins had this football tournament that actually I think they should have won. Went out in the semi-finals to a team they'd already beaten twice easily, and they went out on penalties. This is a football tournament that means that you only have 10-minute games, very short games, very small pitches, very small goals. And the other team knew that they were going to be beaten by us and parked the bus. It's what's called parking the bus. They just put like 6 players in their little penalty area on the line, and we couldn't score. Like 10 minutes of battering the goal, and it was physically impossible for us to score. I've never seen anything like it. They didn't venture out at all. It was literally, they just gave up, said, you've beaten us twice easily, so therefore if we do the same thing again, we will not be able to beat you, so we're just going to park the bus and wait out 10 minutes and then hopefully beat you on penalties, when we only get 3 penalties each because it's a small tournament. And they beat us on penalties. And just like, oh my goodness, in the semi-final. So we went out in the semis. Anyway, it was all good fun and very nice. And I've just cleaned my backpack and found a little vegan snack bar, Eat Me, from Ukraine. So I've got a Ukrainian snack to look forward to just keep myself going after this video. Right, let's get to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. You don't need to hear any other nonsense from me. The numbers are pretty decent, same as what we've seen generally in terms of personnel for the last week. 1,210. It's been sort of up and down, but around that area. 9 tanks, slightly less than we have seen. 9 armoured personnel vehicles is certainly less. 36 artillery systems is fairly useful. It's about double the average over the course of the war. So that is good, very good. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, 68 vehicles and fuel tanks is a very good number in that category. And 10 pieces of special equipment. Obviously, it depends what that is. It's a large umbrella term, that special equipment, or it's an umbrella term that constitutes possibly a large variety of equipment, and that could fall under it. I think the Russians are, having continually challenging times at the moment in terms of equipment losses. And we wonder, as always, whether these Ukrainian general staff figures are in the right ballpark. Is there an over-exaggeration? Then we look at Andrew Perpetua's loss list and you think, yeah, no, the Russians are losing a lot of stuff. Because this is all visually confirmed. There is a URL and often more than one for each of these losses. We can see that statistically, in terms of just the raw numbers here, ignore the last 2 there, you will have about, goodness me, is that 6-to-1 loss ratio? I mean, that's incredibly good for the Ukrainians. Let's look at the value though. The Ukrainians need at least 3-to-1 on a daily basis. So this is very good. A couple of Starlinks. That's very important, Starlinks. But if I was doing this list isn't for me, right? So Andrew includes these because people are interested in that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't include that on here alongside, say, Bradley. Nonetheless, I mean, you could really take that off and the stats would be even better for the Ukrainians. We've got a radar system, unknown radar, could be a small counter-battery radar, unknown as to what it exactly was. We've got Bradley being destroyed, a BMP-1 and another Bradley being damaged. Now, interesting point here, Senator as well. Someone made this point in my comments when I talked about Bradleys recently and whatnot. If we start seeing more Bradleys and Senators and Max Pros, as you've got here, on the Ukrainian loss list, it's actually, you can take that in one of 2 ways. You can say, oh my goodness, they are losing their newer donated equipment from the West. On the other hand, the positive is that's good that they are losing that stuff because it has a greater survivability. So if you see lots of BMP 1s and 2s on there, then it's likely that you're losing more troops with that. It also means that we're getting to a stage where the Ukrainians have chewed through their Soviet-era equipment, quite probably, because it's definitely true that we are seeing more Bradleys and Senators and Max Pros on the list than we were previously. So I actually interpret that as being fairly decent, but it does show that they need continual provision of this kind of equipment. So I'd much rather that Ukrainians are driving at Russian attacks and front lines and doing whatever they're doing with Bradleys than they do it with BMP-1s. We know that the armor's better on them and the offensive capabilities are better. So it's good that they're losing this stuff, although it is high value stuff to lose. Mark my words, I think you will see more and more of this equipment lost regularly for the Ukrainians. Right, for the Russians, they've lost a lot of surveillance and comms equipment, some Brem ones, another couple of recovery vehicles and an engineering vehicle there. They're losing a fair number of these ARVs, armor recovery vehicles, quite often at the moment. Artillery, there's a fair bit of artillery there. 240mm self-propelled mortar. That's the Tulpan. And then, I don't know what a TDA-3 is there. Forest fire caused by Gimlers. It's an engineering vehicle. Sorry, there's not any artillery. And then we get onto tanks, and we have about 50-50 destroyed and damaged. We've got the usual range of tanks. Quite a lot of T-80 BVs here, T-72s. Tracked garden sheds, the tanks with the corrugated iron and whatnot built on top of it. So 3 of those tanks taken out. And then an absolute smorgasbord of infantry fighting vehicles here, mainly BMPs, BMP-1s, 2s and 3s, hit by predominantly first-person view drones, often abandoned and then hit by drones. Some of them taken out by Baba Yagas, the octocopter drones that drop stuff on top of them. You've got BTR-82A here, taken out by Bradley, damaged. There's an insanely interesting video that shows that, and I'll reference that in a minute. I've got it, but I can't really show it to you. I'll probably get restricted. And then we have a lot of we have an amount of APCs, but they are pretty much all destroyed or abandoned there. MTLBs, and then we're into trucks. A lot of golf carts taken out in the last 24 hours or so on the list today, and then civilian vehicles, motorcycles, pickup trucks, cars, loads, SUVs and whatnot. So a whole range of equipment, but my goodness, the Russians have lost a lot of stuff compared to the Ukrainians. That is a very painful day's surveillance of videos. Andrew Perpetua yesterday said he had a comedically large number of videos to look through, so an awful lot of work goes into this. Hats off to the team that does it. Right, this is that Bradley on BTR. It's a fairly incredible bit of footage. I mean, this is a war where we are seeing more and more war footage in ways that, goodness me, we haven't before. This might be the best Bradley versus vehicle footage we've seen. A Bradley infantry fighting vehicle bangs it out with a Russian BTR-82A with troops on top at a spitting distance from each other. So basically, the Bradley is driving towards so actually this is a good still here. There's the Bradley. The BTR was driving along the road, then comes off the road. It's like a game of chicken, but the Bradley's got the armaments that's just hammering. That Bushmaster gun is peppering that BTR. People are falling off it. It then drives past it, still getting hammered, and then drives off the road and I think comes to a standstill. And then the footage cuts from there. I don't know what happens afterwards. So we know it's definitely damaged. It's smoking lots. People are falling off it. It's pretty unfair contest there, the Bradley versus the BTR. I'm just quite surprised it carried on doing that, going towards it. Like, oh my goodness, there's a Bradley there. It's absolutely hammering us with an autocannon. Keep on driving, driver. Just keep on. Yeah, and we got people on top. Is it we're not firing back really, are we? Yeah, just keep on driving, and then it goes past it, and then veers off, and that's the end of it. Rather than stopping, going. Or just doing a Yui. Yeah, no, we'll fight. We'll live to fight another day. We'll just run away for a bit and then take another route or whatever. But yeah, it seems like a pretty suicidal course of action that BTR took. Anyway, you can watch that. It's linked in the video below. Here we've got imagery of a strike on a concentration of Russian soldiers in Khyber. This is up near Vovchansk in that northern Kharkiv area. You have a town, look, very picturesque area, getting ravaged by weaponry. This appears to be, I don't know if it's like AASM Hammer, the guided glide bombs from the Ukrainians, or whether it's artillery, Gimlers, whatnot. I'm not sure, but they are certainly giving the Russians a heck of a hard time up north at the moment. And as I say, I think it's been an operational disaster for the Russians. Interesting news coming out today that the F-16s, I think they're working on the F-16s so that they can fire the French AASM Hammers. So that's good news. It seems to be something that a capability that they will have. Border guards are destroying here an engineering equipment with which the enemy is trying to set up their positions in the Sumy direction. Just to say that the Ukrainians are going across the border with their drones and systematically trying to stop the Russians from accumulating, digging down, getting positions that might allow them to attack, in this case from Kursk Oblast, probably into the Sumy Oblast in northern. That's to the northwest of Kharkiv, rather than just above Kharkiv at the moment, where the Russians have been attacking. Then we see this. This is a Ukrainian Yak-52 piston trainer aircraft. So it's a propeller aircraft, old school aircraft, 2 crew members on board. And here, this is in the camera lens of the Zala 42116E series drone. This is, from what I can gather, a Russian reconnaissance drone being targeted. And I think the claim is shot down, but I don't know for sure. All I've seen is this footage. There have been previous reports of Yak-52 shooting down drones. So here we have, Yak-52 shot down a Russian reconnaissance drone in the sky over Odessa. That's from today, I think. So they need to have an answer for these reconnaissance drones that seem to be able to get very far behind the front line and spot for missiles, Iskander missiles or similar, or drone attacks onto really high value targets for the Ukrainians, like jets at airfields, so on and so forth. So this is one way of being able to counteract those reconnaissance drones. And then here we have a bit of disinformation. So India joining forces with the Russian propaganda machine. It's quite incredible, really, that the Times of India, which I do believe is fairly pro-Russian, although I think, goodness me, my ears are bleeding. Quite often the Hindustan Times is one that is spouting pro-Russian stuff. Anyway, Times of India reports deadliest Russian attacks on Ukraine. Quote, record 10,000 Ukrainian troops wiped out. Source, MOD Russia. Times of India, just absolute nonsense here. Russia brings Ukrainian army to its knees on the battlefield. And we've got pictures from winter here, right? Produced by the Times of India in the last 7 hours. Just absolute nonsense. Putin goes all out after NATO. Nations permit strikes. But again, Ukraine faced one of the bloodiest weeks as Russia rains rockets across the front lines in the wintertime. What are you talking about? Anyway, gets community noted here, so on and so forth. Just absolute nonsense. But why the Times of India is doing this? Well, obviously the feelers are out for those tendrils of influence that are rooted in the Kremlin find their way to many destinations around the world. Right, moving on to strikes, distance munitions and whatnot. It was a fairly quiet night for that in terms of drones and missiles sent into Ukraine. 9 out of 13 Shaheeds were shot down and 1 missile was shot down, a KH-59 missile there. So still, a few of those got through. 4 Shaheeds did get through. Don't know the damage they did. Don't know where they were aimed at. It was a very busy night, I think, inside Russia and occupied territories of Ukraine, though. Ukraine sending out quite a number of drones. I don't know about missiles. It's going to be, I think, one of those days where bits of information will filter through. because a lot of these were either quite far behind front lines or at in the middle of the night, areas that you won't necessarily get footage from super quick. So Tim White said, originally I'll start in Occupy Crimea where there was action overnight. There was talk last night. There were even rumours last night that ship's been sunk. I've not heard anything this morning, but it could be that a ship has been sunk, possibly in Sevastopol. A really big, I think, explosion in Sevastopol. But yeah, explosions were first heard in Balaclava near the power station, and later a series of blasts in Sevastopol. Russia says it destroyed a couple of Sea Baby marine drones and 25 drones during its aerial drones during the night. Traditionally, Russia says there was no damage, but yeah, as per their tradition. But residents in Sevastopol disagree, posting photos of windows being blown out by a blast wave, supposedly from the surface drone being destroyed, which seems a little doubtful. So these Sea Baby naval drones have possibly got into the port of Sevastopol and done something, or been blown up, or whatever. Something's happened, and as I say, very faint rumours of a possibility of a ship being sunk, but massive block assault with that. And then at night, from 3 a.m. Moscow time to 4 a.m., drones attacked the Akhtubinsk air base, where the Su-57 is based. Su-57 is their latest fighter. They have not committed to this war. I think there was a rumour that it's been used maybe on a front line once or twice in the eastern frontline areas, but essentially the Su-57 hasn't been used. Now the question is that because they don't have the pilots for it? Is that because they don't have the ammunition for it? Is that because it's actually not as good as they claimed it is as a fifth generation fighter? What is going on with the Su-57? Is it too expensive to use? Is it too much of a risk to, if they lose one of these, that it will be an absolute PR disaster? But they haven't really been used. Nonetheless, it appears that a base was low numbers were produced. If they hit one, it's awesome. Any fighter or bomber plane would be just fine. We'll celebrate. So that was one place that was targeted. Belgorod, there's an explosion going on in this footage, this CCTV footage. I think a big old explosion takes place in that top left-hand corner. That's Belgorod, I presume Belgorod city. So you would think that we've quite often seen S-300s and 400s being targeted around there. They have air defenses around Belgorod. I meant to have this earlier, actually. I'll probably leave that till the end. We'll talk about that at the end. Then the Ukrainian armed forces appear to have launched a drone strike utilizing Mugin 5 long-range attack drones earlier today against the Mozdok air base in North Ossetia region in southeastern Russia. I'll show you where that is in a while, which is well over 400 miles from the nearest front line in Ukraine. The base is home to several Tu-22 M3 Backfire C strategic bombers, as well as a number of Su-24 MRs and MiG-31Ks of the Russian Air Force. Damage to the base is currently unknown, but gunfire and an explosion can be heard in this footage. I mean, there's quite a few bits of footage coming out of these drones going overhead. They basically look like small planes. One more of the drones in Russian Mozdok appeared. Aircraft that is used to bomb Ukraine is located at that airfield. So as you can see, it's got the twin tails at the back and fairly sizable drone there that probably packed with a fair amount of explosive capability. Ukraine's intel has confirmed the attack on Mozdok airfield using its own drones. It's the first such attack in North Ossetia. Head of the region, Sergei Menyailo, initially said no damage or injuries, later admitted minor damages and fires, which may even mean a big hit. So when the Russians say there's nothing, that obviously means it often means there's something that's happened. And when they say there's minor fires, it often means there are actually major fires. But not necessarily. It might only be minor damage. But actually, you can see, is it this footage? No, it's not this footage. That's the same one. This is just to mention a little bit more detail, which is, 700 kilometers behind the front. 400 miles was mentioned earlier. So initially, the MOD wrote that they shot down one drone. Then the head of North Ossetia said that it was 3. And the photo shows a wreckage of 6 drones. Of course, that's not 6 drones just shot down there, so you can't tell whether they're shot down or blown up. But they are collecting bits of stuff. and then piling it here. There's no impact of any of this here, so that photo is evidently staged, or if it's not staged, it's they've collected the stuff and thrown it down there. Initially, the Ministry of Defense, Russia claimed that. Then 6 drones were shown, and it is not a fact that they were shot down. Well, not definitely at all. So this is a footage that's just come out now, and this is the moment it was. It exploded. It went down and hit. So this is the drone not being shot. I'll turn the sound off. Unfortunately, this sound's really important here, but there's an awful lot of small arms fire, which tells you something. It tells you this base is not protected by air defences. There's just little pea shooters being shot at this. Nothing works on it. It flies over perfectly happily, and there's quite a lot of small arms fire. It flies over perfectly happily and then does its terminal phase. And then hits, this is, I presume, all part of the airport, and hits one part of the airport just over there. It just goes down and down and down, does that nosedive, and then there is a big old explosion that follows, and then a puff of smoke. So that has done its job there, one would think. That appears to be at least one drone successfully hitting Mozdok Air Base. Mozdok Air Base, I'm sure I had that. I've got a map. Where have I got a map? Here it is. So this is, if you think South Ossetia is an annexed area of Georgia that the Russians have stolen, one of the 2 areas they've stolen off the Georgians, rather like Luhansk, Donetsk and Crimea. But North Ossetia is obviously just a little bit north of there, in between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. So that's an air base that the Russians use to strike Ukraine. And despite Russian state media stating that Ukrainian drones were shot down, they are now admitting the airport was indeed hit. After the drone attack in North Ossetia, there's destruction and fire. So there you go. Now, this footage has come out of another shot of today's drone attack on Prokhorovka, BNR. I'm trying to work out what BNR is, because I think it can mean Belarus. But I think this is Prokhorovka in Belgorod Oblast. So there is a more. That's that same footage you saw, right? Okay, the CCTV is of that. Okay, that makes sense. I hadn't realised that before. So that's a drone into Belgorod, and there could be others. Just is one of those nights where the Ukrainians, I think, were quite busy, and things might filter through today. Now, I reported yesterday that there's a smoke outside fire outside Kiev, that an industrial enterprise had been hit, or warehouse. It actually turns out the Russians had hit 2 oil depots in the Kiev region. So this is going to hurt Ukraine. This is what the Ukrainians are doing so successfully to the Russians. Russians have done this a number of times. They hit some oil depots up in Kharkiv. Actually, was that around when I was in Ukraine, or was it just before? Anyway, that was bad up north then, and then now 2 oil depots hit here, and that will hurt Ukrainian logistics and supplies and whatnot. So that was yesterday, as in 2 nights ago now. Strikes there. Right, now on to other bits and pieces. David D, who isn't always the most accurate, sometimes quite positive for Ukraine, a little too positive. But he's one of these people that keeps an eye on what units are where on the front line, and has maps that are called that show that. He says Russia is spreading itself thin and playing to the strong points of the Ukrainian military. They are pulling more units out of the east and moving them to the north. So again, this is the claim that the Russians, though they were trying to get the Ukrainians to do this, and that was one of the intentions of that northern offensive, they are actually doing it themselves, which means it's a complete failure. I would surmise. They're pulling more units out of the east and moving to the north. They are leaving defensive positions they have built over a year and attacking into prepared, dug-in, mostly fresh Ukrainian units. And also he says, and this is a good point, this, having the internal lines, I've talked about this previously during the war, having the internal lines is a benefit. So basically, if you're being attacked from the outside, When Russia wants to do some, I don't know, some refueling, some supplies, they often have to do big doglegs to go around to get stuff from here to there, especially using existing rail networks. They have to do things that turn out to be quite inefficient. So to get troops from A to B, like to react to the desperate state of affairs in Kharkiv, you can see they had to go up and around into Belgorod and down, whereas the Ukrainians just nip across using their own internal infrastructure that they look after, rather than you've got the Russians using a mixture of newly occupied areas in Luhansk, and then going into Russia, and that may present an issue. Ukrainians are just cutting off that corner there. So the Ukrainians are doing one side of a triangle, of a right angle triangle, if you like, and the Russians are doing two sides of a right angle triangle. And that just means things are just more difficult for the Russians. So there you go. I thought I'd throw that one in there. Right, talking about Ukrainian energy, as we have a little bit with the oil, well, let's go on to their energy production in terms of their infrastructure. Russia has destroyed 50% of Ukraine's power generation capacity, according to the Ukrainian government. 73% of the large thermal power plants have been destroyed or damaged by Russian strikes. Also, 20 hydroelectric power units are out of operation. This is 1.3 gigawatts of capacity, the cabinet ministers have said. For what purposes has the Kremlin practically destroyed and continues to destroy Ukraine's energy sector? As I said before, Russia has no way to counterattack the Ukrainian armed forces, so one of their main goals now is genocide of the civilian population, to make Ukrainian cities uninhabitable, especially in winter, when the absence and severe lack of electricity will actually mean death for many Ukrainians. My guess is that Putin might use Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which Russia previously seized, as a means of blackmail in the fall, in autumn, or closer to winter. He may promise to return the plant's capacity to Ukraine's system in exchange for accepting his conditions. Interesting. Now the main priority for us is to prepare for winter. We must provide critical infrastructure with electricity. Otherwise, millions of Ukrainian refugees will seek refuge in Europe during the winter. There have been requests from the Ukrainian government that people use less electricity because they are desperate. You are having forced lockdown, blackouts throughout the day, every day. The Ukrainian energy infrastructure is on its knees. This is the single weakest area of Ukraine at the moment. Now, on the one hand, you can sell that as an act of kind of genocide or war crime against the civilian population. And I think you can make a good case for that. You can also make a case that hitting the energy infrastructure has a very important military benefit, which is that the government stops functioning. You know, it has that political element that then underwrites the military effort. And if there's if you break the spine of the population, that was the attempt with the Blitz in London, right? You break the spine of the population by hitting these key civilian pieces of infrastructure, well, also hitting civilians. I'm not concentrating on taking out civilians here, but actually the infrastructure that can be seen as more civilian. So there's an issue. So there's a political ramification to that, and a morale ramification. But there's also an economic ramification, both in terms of pure economics. So the money that the country can generate, industries can't operate because there are power cuts. It's not good for Ukraine at all. This, but also specifically the military-industrial complex that are trying to make all these weapons for the Ukrainian army to help defend themselves, then cannot operate properly, and you've got all this potential inward investment coming from all these arms manufacturers from abroad, who might then get cold feet and say, actually, this isn't such a good idea because you guys can't promise us reliable electricity supply. It's a massive challenge. So you can argue that it isn't just a kind of genocidal outlook to this. That might also be the case. You know, it might be a bit of a corollary, a bit of a collateral ramification to this. What they were actually aiming to do in the previous winter, or the winter of 2022 and 2023, take out the energy infrastructure so that people froze, and it didn't really happen. So yeah, I think the Russians are doing a good job. Scare quotes good. They are succeeding very much in taking out Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and that is a massive challenge for the Ukrainians. It really is. I think they are very close to crumbling in this way. I think in so many other ways, Ukraine is doing a really good job, and they're gaining momentum. But this is where they are weak. Ukrainian state and local authorities have ordered people to reduce electricity consumption. Prime Minister Shmyhal has called on state authorities yesterday to reduce electricity consumption amid Russia's continuing attacks on the infrastructure. Shmyhal said that, quote, ministries, central executive bodies and regional state administrations should no longer use air conditioning or external lighting on buildings. Local authorities have been asked to limit street lighting. And here you can see a video of So I'll turn the sound off now. It's useful to hear that, to get a sense of all of these generators. This is in Odessa working. This was something that happened after the beginning of the war. The outbreak of the war, there were loads of generators operational in Kyiv particularly. And now we are seeing many industries and commercial properties requiring generators to keep going, and also for civilian life as well in residential buildings. This is something I think you'll see more and more of. There are many moves afoot to help support Ukraine in this way, with a number of generators, some much larger than these smaller ones, to allow Ukraine to keep going in its time of need. So hopefully the EU and the US, UK, other allied nations can continue to supply generators for Ukraine. And now, last couple of things, just interesting few anecdotes here. Of course, take it with a pinch of salt. So what's going on here? Apparently, this is reportedly in Novosibirsk in Russia. You've got a veteran coming back, and she knows he's a veteran, and basically saying, "You're murderers. You're all murderers." Quite incredible. Why did you save? Who asked you to save them? No one asked you to save them, as in the Ukrainians. You're a murderer, a real murderer. Yes, a murderer. You're all murderers. So here, there are people, it's them that kill civilians and we save them, says the man. She says, you're murderers. Who do you save? Who asked you to save them? No one asked you to save them. And they asked, he says back, they asked, who, that means you're murderers. She says in reply. So yeah, they curse you, as in the Ukrainians curse you. So you're not saving them, they're cursing you. I thought that was interesting. It is just one person's opinion, but to be able to voice that so publicly, or or to have the guts to do that, probably means that you're not the only one that thinks that there might be some kind of prevailing thought. Maybe it's her and all the people she knows thinks that, to the point where she feels confident enough to say that. If you're like the only person thinking that in a very strict society with internal security entities always snooping on you, etc., then you would feel very wary about saying something like this. I get a sense that there might be more people who are against the war than you might think. Then you look at something like this. So again, it's placing these anecdotes together and thinking, does it mean anything? Well, okay, well, here we've got another one. So here a prankster has put, I don't know if it's a prank really. It is kind of a prank, but I presume he was actually trying to see whether people had these kind of opinions. So what happened is a guy puts up in an elevator, and I think a residential building is newly renovated, and to coincide with that renovation, he puts up a big picture of Putin in the lift, right, and then attaches a camera up in the corner of the lift, and then checks people's reactions to this huge picture of Putin. And it's kind of priceless, because everyone, at least the ones that he puts together on a montage, I mean, you don't know whether there's some kind of a bias with what he's selected, how widespread these opinions are. But there certainly are opinions. Just be careful, because you might be being manipulated a little. There might be 2,000 people who got in, and only 10 people said bad things about Putin. He puts all 10 together and says, look, everyone hates Putin, type thing. But nonetheless, it's just interesting the way that there are these natural reactions when people walk in. If you listen to it, it's like, oh my God, oh, for F's sake, not him, and all this kind of stuff. And interesting. This is a different one that I've seen. I've seen one where everyone's faces are blurred out. So this is quite interesting. This is one with people not blurred out. Oh dear. So the FSB are going to be on this, because all these people are like, oh my God, what kind of person would put this here? This is a nightmare, says an old lady walking a dog. And then someone just walking on, not getting in that lift. Ugh. So on and so forth. It's just interesting that you have these reactions to Putin. Just great. Shaking his head. Love it. I just hope these people are safe. And an interesting montage of people basically slagging off Putin. I saw a different video that was differently set up, differently done to that. So I had a few different people as well. So anyway, point being that perhaps, I mean, might be a bit of hopium from me, but perhaps there are more people in Russia who are against the war and against Putin, really, than people might think. It depends probably where you are. So Moscow's traditionally been fairly anti-Putin, anti-Kremlin, because it's this liberal elite city where you're more likely to have a bit of pushback. You're going to have your middle-class intellectuals, you're much more likely in places like that to have a pushback against certain types of fascistic nationalism that you see in the Kremlin and in Putin's ideology. The same is said at supposedly St. Petersburg as well. So those two places generally have more of a pushback to Putin, and places outside Buryatia and Irkutsk might not be the same, although they might have their issues for other reasons. But they often say that 25% of people in Russia are dead against the war, 25% of people are dead for the war, 50% are in the middle, kind of like, meh, as long as it doesn't affect me type thing. So, yeah, interesting mix. You are going to have a lot of people around Russia who will be against the Kremlin, against the war and against Putin, but they just won't be so willing to publicly admit it, because you end up in a gulag or in prison. And that's why a lot of the people at the beginning of the war, during the protests for the war, when they're all getting locked up, you hope you reach a critical mass. There wasn't quite enough people protesting, or the security services were that overwhelming. There were more people in the Russian security services than in the armed forces. So that's how significant the security services are. So in the end, a lot of people who were against the war ran away in that first wave of people doing a runner from Russia. Anyway, that's enough for waffling from me. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care of yourselves. Really appreciate your support. I'll speak to you soon.